Hi, welcome to another episode of the Med Device Cyber Podcast. Today we have a guest from Greenlight Guru. We've got Etienne. Etienne works with Greenlight Guru, and they specialize in quality management systems. We also have Trevor, who you've seen before on our podcast. Trevor works for Blue Goat Cyber. He's our director of medical device cybersecurity, our in-the-weeds tech person who does a lot of the hacking and leads our hacking team. So welcome to the podcast. Etienne, you want to introduce yourself a little more formally than I did?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. My name's Etienne Nichols. Greenlight Guru. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about what I do at Greenlight Guru. So my position is the head of industry insights and education at Greenlight Guru. So I get to talk to a lot of professionals such as yourself, and I head up a lot of different articles and content that we produce and try to just add that insight to the industry. So at Greenlight Guru, a lot of people look at us as a content provider in some ways. In a lot of ways we are, but ultimately the way we make money, I suppose, is to sell software solutions to the industry. And what we specialize is in quality management system and clinical investigation solutions.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of your podcasts, and you guys do create a lot of content.
Yeah, well, it's good that you've seen it at least. Hopefully it's been, maybe helpful or beneficial in some way.
It has, because when I first started doing this stuff, I didn't know what a QMS was or what ISO 13485 is. There's a lot of like acronyms and like this QSR, QMS, 21 CFR 820. There's all these things, and it's if you're kind of new to MedTech, it can be super confusing because we from cybersecurity we have all these acronyms, and then you combine that with the MedTech. And then the FDA and the MDR, those are acronyms within themselves. It becomes a very confusing space. Plus, then you have the medical acronyms, that people use as well. So it's very acronym rich.
Yeah, even when the regulatory agencies themselves are an acronym, there's kind of a problem going on, an obsession with acronyms. And there's a new one coming on too, QMSR, which you mentioned ISO and FDA's QSR. If you combine those, you've got QMSR. That's what's coming next, Quality Management System Regulation from FDA. And we could talk a little bit about that if you want. Just however you want to go. Happy to go whatever trail you like.
Yeah, I think it would probably be useful just to establish a baseline and let people know from a high level what a QMS is and why they would even need one. A lot of our clients are startups, and they probably haven't even thought down the road, like, we need a QMS. They're busy trying to innovate their product and get it to market. So maybe you can explain like why they would need one and how it's beneficial to them.
Yeah. So a quality management system isn't something that's unique to MedTech. It's, I think some of the fathers of quality, Deming and Crosby, quality is free guys from the 1980s, they really pushed this quality concept. The idea that you can produce consistent, reliable product if you put certain processes in place and manage those with a very consistent way of managing.
Is this like Six Sigma? Didn't Deming come up with Six Sigma?
Yeah. I think that's right. I get them all mixed up. I've gone through different ones. They start to crisscross over but yeah, so the quality management system idea is not necessarily unique, but in most industries they have something called ISO 9001, which is the international standard for how you would lay those processes out. So you would have management review, you would have customer service, you would have a certain way of designing the product, a certain standard flow. Well, for MedTech, they built on top of ISO 9001 something called ISO 13485, which is the international standard for how medical devices should approach their quality management. Well, you ask, what is a quality management system? That's a good question. It's the company's defined way of approaching quality. How are you going to produce consistent, reliable, safe, and effective medical devices? So in a nutshell, at a very high level, that's what a quality management system is. You go down a few layers. It's the actual procedures you have in place, your quality manual, your quality, the different things you actually put in place to say, we are going to follow these different work instructions. We're not going to change them without going through a certain approval process and so on.
Okay. And with cybersecurity, that's our focus. I know a lot of our clients add the cybersecurity documentation, such as risk management. They use a QMS so they can have a record of when they update it and a history of everything. From an audit perspective, if the FDA or MDR asks for evidence that supports the plan they submitted when they got clearance, would they pull all that stuff from the QMS, or what's some best practices around that?
That's a good question. So cybersecurity is something that the FDA has been increasingly ratcheting down on. I'm sure you guys could probably educate circles around me as far as how much they've ratcheted down, especially in the last 18 months or 2 years. But one of the things that they expect is that cybersecurity is going to be built into the medical device by design. So that's going to be, that is required to be in your design controls. Now, I'm mentioning something that is embedded within the quality management system. So quality management system is the overarching company's approach to quality. Within that is your approach to designing product. And that's typically called design controls, design and development, however you want to approach it, whatever terminology you want to use. Within that design controls process, you need to be specifying how you are approaching cybersecurity, how you're implementing those controls. And so you mentioned if the FDA came and knocked on your door and said, "Hey, we want to see how you're designing your products. We want to inspect you." They would probably start with your top level procedures and then drill down. Okay, you say you are developing your product in a certain way, and this is your approach to cybersecurity. Let's pull a design history file and let's actually look and see how that's actually done. So we're going to look through your procedure. We're going to compare what you've actually done in your design history file, both to that procedure and the regulation, and see how you stand up to it.
That's an interesting point you bring up, that and we agree, the FDA and just general best practices to design your device with cybersecurity in mind. We don't see that happen very often. We see most people try to bolt it on at the end, which is very costly, and it doesn't support a QMS very well or an audit because it's not designed in, as you mentioned. And maybe I'll throw this over to Trevor. Trevor, from your experience with our clients, like, what percentage would you say, like what Etienne is saying, like they've actually designed cybersecurity in? Because I know we've had conversations around functional requirements and non-functional requirements, and cybersecurity being, quote, non-functional. Like, what are your thoughts on this? And based on your experience, like, how many companies actually design this stuff in cybersecurity?
I'd say at some level, probably around 60% of the companies that we interact with are designing cybersecurity in. And that's
60% or 60? Okay, that's higher than I thought.
Well, this is where I get to the caveat with that number. That is to some extent where we go through and I say, "Hey, can you describe some of your security controls?" And they go, "Yeah, we have an Excel sheet with 10 rows on it, and it explains all of the things that we thought could happen." And so we, made sure that we have encryption in the database. And that's about as far as it'll go. I would say getting down to a point where I ask at the start of a project, "Hey, can you show me any non-functional requirements you have relating to cybersecurity?" And they say, "Here's this. Here's the threat modeling that we did throughout the design phase. Here are all of our considerations. Here's the traceability to the features that we built into the device to incorporate cybersecurity." That is a number probably closer to 5%.
One of the things that I think about when I say designing risk or designing cybersecurity into the medical device is the risk management. Like you said, what are the different things that could happen? And medical devices are required to follow ISO 14971. It doesn't really mention cybersecurity in that, but if you look at the 24971, which is the kind of the guide on how to implement ISO 14971, it does have examples on how to implement those cybersecurity measures. But I would love to hear just a brief snippet from you as to some of that advice we could give different from our customers, even, for example, in designing that in other ways, or is that the primary way you would say needs to be done?
So ISO 14971, that is safety risk management. And part of what the FDA is trying to look for is separate but connected risk management frameworks. So ISO 14971 covers that safety risk management, and then TIR 57 covers security risk management. They are both very similar. TIR 57 is loosely modeled off of 14971. So they operate in a similar way. And part of what we like to see there's a risk assessment phase. After you identify a problem, you're evaluating what the impact could be before you move on to a control. Oftentimes, as part of evaluating that impact, you realize that a safety risk has a security impact or vice versa. And then there's a direct point in both of those risk management frameworks where one can feed into the other or the other way around. So having those two distinct processes in place is a good way to address safety and security in tandem.
There's another risk that I think about sometimes, just because being on the quality management system side, one of the biggest reasons you would want a quality management system is traceability. And you mentioned a few different assessments there. One of the things that we in medical device focus on the most, I feel like, is legal risk. So, and when I say legal risk, I mean regulatory. And I guess I would lump regulatory in with legal risk, because like product liability, for example. So you don't want anyone to get hurt, but we're looking at that through a regulatory lens. We are following the rules. We're going to be legally, compliant. But then there's that ethical risk. We actually don't want anyone to get hurt. So we're going to be some ethical things to make sure no one gets hurt. But then there's the third one that sometimes we don't always trace back to the company. And that is, you do that assessment once, you lose it in your Google Drive, someone else comes along and you do it again. And so that's the third leg of the company. And you have that legal, you have the ethical, but then you also have the economical risks of having to do things over and over again, or doing it at the end, like you said, and then driving it backwards. So it's one of the things that I think we do a pretty good job of, is making sure that the processes are a little bit more streamlined. So you do it one time, and if it's done right, you don't have to do it as many times again, or redoing your work just because of lost or untraceable documents. But yeah, anyway, I kind of took over. I didn't mean to. Yeah, go ahead, Christian.
No, as you're mentioning that, there's something that comes up quite a bit. CAPA, or corrective and preventative. I think it's corrective and preventative. Another acronym. We have so many freaking acronyms. It's corrective and preventative actions, right?
Yes, preventive. Yeah.
Right. So that is typically in a QMS. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So can you explain what that actually means? Because my impression is something happens, they have to show it runs through this process, and how they actually take some steps from a quality perspective to make sure it doesn't happen again. And this could be a cybersecurity incident. It could be, electrical component that goes bad on the device. It could be any number of things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the CAPA is, from the FDA perspective, it's part of 21 CFR Part 820, and they have corrective action, preventive action, different things that you have to follow. If you have a nonconformance, or if you have a glitch, something that happens that needs to be fixed, it may be a one-off situation. Maybe it's a particular user error, and you do a certain root cause analysis, and you think, okay, well, that could probably never happen again. I don't know, depending on how you do your analysis, and you do a correction. So there's a correction, corrective action, preventive action, to truly get the definitions. Now, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but ISO 1345:2016 is harmonizing, or is FDA 21 FDA's Part 820 is harmonizing with 1485. Those definitions go back to ISO 9001, which goes back to ISO 9000. So forget that if that was not helpful. But in ISO 9000, if you look at the definitions, correction is that fix of the actual problem that broke. So if something broke, you fixed it. That was a correction.
So we have to get to the root cause, though. And there's like the 5 whys, or the fishbone diagram, or a couple ways. Is that right?
Absolutely. So that's where the corrective action comes in. So that's a higher level. Now we're going to do our root cause, like you said, whatever the fishbone, Ishikawa, et cetera. I love 5 whys. Whatever your root cause of analysis of choice is, you go back and then you put in those corrective actions. Preventive actions, they're a little bit more unusual, I suppose, but it's more you look from the industry and the broader or across product lines, and you see other issues that may occurring, and you apply those corrections to something that hasn't broken or there's no issues at the moment, but it's almost like an improvement process at that point.
So if we're doing cybersecurity, there's a product on the market, it's already cleared by FDA or MDR, and we're doing post-market management. If there is a new vulnerability identified, that will run through the CAPA process, correct? from a QMS perspective?
It could. So I can see that going through the CAPA process. If it's just a new vulnerability identified, it could just go through the design controls process. And I could see that being evaluated as a change to the product itself and just apply typical risk management processes to it. But
okay, so it would just be a design update versus we have to, I mean, you have to get the root issue anyway. Like we do post-market management. So if an incident comes in or a reported incident, we have to determine if it's a true positive or false positive. So we do some of that, I guess, analysis initially before, and then the recommendation would be a change to configuration or a design update.
Okay, yeah, I think I missed the part. Like you see something in the field, yeah, I would expect that to go through a CAPA.
Okay, and so it seems to me like a QMS makes all this documentation and audits a lot easier. So we deal with a lot of startups that have no idea what a QMS is. It's not on their radar. They just have a brilliant idea. It's like a CEO and a CTO sometimes.
Yeah.
And we also deal with some massive companies, like 6,000 people. And to me, it's a little bit perplexing because some of our clients are large companies, and what they have is not something like Greenlight Guru. They don't have a QMS. What they're using is like a super large Excel spreadsheet with hyperlinks that go to documents on Google Drive with no document control. What? I mean, is that really acceptable from a, ISO 1345 perspective, or from an FDA audit perspective? What is your perspective on that?
There's a thing in 21 CFR that the FDA has. It's part 11 where it talks about electronic signatures and the requirements around those. So there is quite a bit of additional lift if you want to be Part 11 compliant with something like a Google Drive and Excel spreadsheet. At Greenlight Guru, we do recommend right-sizing your QMS. So I wouldn't recommend giving you a 1,200 horsepower Dodge Dually diesel to just take a package home from Walmart. That's not what we want to recommend. But what I would recommend is that you have something that's already streamlined and put in place for the industry. So yes, absolutely. What Greenlight Guru does, what I recommend anyway, and those at Greenlight Guru would be right there with me, would be the primary parts of a QMS, at least at the very beginning, would be your document management to make sure you have approvals in place for any kind of changes that take place, and that you can record all of the different things leading up to this state of processes or product that you have in place. Secondly, it would be the supplier management. And actually, second would be design controls, where you have an actual codified design controls process where you're actually going through and keeping track of all the things that you're doing as you're building your product. And then the third thing would be that supplier management, to really make sure that anything that's happening outside your walls is still in keeping with the quality that you want inside your walls. So those are the things that I recommend just from a broader quality management system perspective. Now, how you manage all of that documentation, something like Greenlight Guru makes it a lot easier. We put those guardrails in place. We are already built on ISO 1345 principles with design controls and traceability throughout. So that would certainly make their life easier, if not more possible, especially from a startup perspective.
Yeah. Since we're talking about quality, I was just thinking as you're talking, Etienne, and maybe I'll throw this over to Trevor, because cybersecurity and quality, are these like opposite or related? Like from a medical device, I don't know. I'm not going to answer. What do you think, Trevor?
I think that they are related. So quality ultimately just goes down to, are we creating a good product? Are we putting out something that is consistent, reliable, and just flat out good? I can bring this back to a threat modeling exercise, which is really important part of medical device cybersecurity and cybersecurity in general. For medical device threat modeling, There are sort of the 4 questions. What are we working on? What can we do? Or I guess what can go wrong? What can we do about it? And the final one is, did we do a good job? Are we ensuring that quality? Are we ensuring that everything went through a due proper process? And is everything actually going to be safe? Device with low quality without security is going to be prone to a lot of problems. And with a medical device, those problems can be life impacting. So it's pretty important to make sure we're doing everything right.
Yeah, 100%. I'd agree with that. I really liked what you said about cybersecurity when we were talking about risk management as well, and just kind of the differences there and how they're connected.
Yeah, and I think that connection is, it's really important. A lot of times, we'll have a conversation. Oh, well, you need to assess this risk under this criteria. And we'll hear clients say, well, this seems like a security risk, not a safety problem. So I don't know why we would need to do this under safety risk management. And it's very rarely just a clean cut line. I think that's why TR 57 kind of connects so well with ISO 14971. And that's just because inherently a security risk in a medical device is going to lead to a safety risk. It's a rare situation where there's just a purely security focused problem. There's always going to be some level of overlap. So identifying what that overlap is, knowing sort of the entry points into each risk management framework and how you can best correct these actions, it's an important area to have a little bit of tie-in.
I'm gonna ask a question here as we're discussing this. There's a lot of quality assurance stuff, a lot of regulatory affairs stuff, and for some reason, I'm just curious on your two's perspective. I noticed the RA and QA are often the same person or the same division of a company, even though it seems like they might be a little bit different. Like, what is your perspective, Etienne, on that?
Yeah. So I think the reason QA, RA sort of gets lumped together is because in the startup world, you need somebody who can, people wear a lot of hats. The further up and the more mature an organization gets, you start to realize they truly are different hats. The quality, in my perspective, I'll just use kind of a layman's example. Quality is more of the defensive line. They protect your processes, your internal processes. When the FDA comes and bangs down the door and says, hey, what are you guys doing in here? It's the quality people who are defending that. The regulatory people, they're your offensive line. They're the ones who take that device that you've designed and put together DHF. They take that to the regulatory agencies. They're the ones going and defending it to get it submitted and getting it across the finish line, so to speak, into the market. So that's kind of how I see the division of quality and regulatory. They're both dictated to through the FDA regulations and other regulatory agencies if you're in Europe, EU MDR, and so on. But they have slightly different roles in that one is more regulatory is focused more on the product and quality's focused more on the process.
Yeah, I like that analogy of the offense versus defense. Quality is more defense, regulatory is more offense. We work with large companies and it's the same person or same team most of the time. But it seems to me like I played football in high school. I played offense and defense. It's exhausting to go both ways, both right. So it seems like maybe, like you said, as they mature, it would be more of a separate divisions. And
you usually see people have kind of a preference one for another. It seems like, towards one direction or the other. They typically have a kind of a leaning or a bent, it seems, at least in my experience that I've seen.
Okay. Awesome. And then cybersecurity blends both quality, as we talked about, and regulatory, because obviously from a offense perspective or submittal to the FDA or MDR, you've got to have your cybersecurity properly lined up and all your I's dotted and T's crossed.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, go ahead. Well, I was just thinking it's almost similar, or I don't know how it would be in the cybersecurity world, but I can see cybersecurity. It obviously has to be in the device and around the design as you submit that device. But then you also want your company documents, the cybersecurity of your actual company. That's the kind of qualities interaction maybe with cybersecurity versus regulatory's interaction. But would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts there?
What do you think, Trevor?
I think there's a lot of overlap. So when we're seeing So when you're going through the process to submit a medical device, of course, you have to account for the cybersecurity in the device itself. But as part of that threat modeling exercise, we look at what if there's an insider threat? What if, an employee goes rogue? What if the version control system gets compromised? There are a lot of things that we have to consider. The solutions to those can't be, we harden the device better. It doesn't work like that. You have to look at that organizational level policy. Now, for a 510K submission, the FDA is not going to require that you do full penetration test against your facility. What we do see as an interesting trend is that oftentimes the purchasers of a medical device, so these hospitals or the ORs, are going to want to see that. So we have had some clients come to us and say, hey, this hospital wants to see that we've done an internal network and a physical penetration test before they take our product. They want to know that our manufacturing environment is safe. So it's not necessarily going to be something that you have to lean into for that initial getting over the first finish line, getting cleared, getting onto the market. Once you're onto the market, though, then that's an issue that may come up more. And the FDA is still going to want to see what you have as a solution to those potential problems as you're going through them in a threat modeling exercise.
That's an interesting point that you bring up. I don't know that I've heard someone tell me that about cybersecurity specifically, because it's just my own ignorance. So that's really interesting to hear. But what's interesting is it kind of parallels very closely with clinical investigations. So, Greenlight Guru has a clinical arm, and we talk to a lot of medical devices who need clinical investigations. Typically with a 510K, you might not need a clinical investigation, but just like you said, it's the hospital, the clinicians themselves may want that clinical evidence that your product is viable and may, show that it has a little bit more capability than the competitor product. So just to get to market in a certain way, you may not have to do certain things. But I think that's really interesting that you point that out. That's a really good point, I think.
It's an especially big concern with hospitals. I'm sure you guys have heard about the United Healthcare breach and then various ransomware attacks against different hospitals. And it seems like there's one that pops up every couple of days at this point. So a lot of that is through an insecure component or a network device. Oftentimes it'll be like a firewall or a printer has a problem. We've done a lot of penetration tests against hospitals, and anytime I find a printer on that network, I have pretty good luck getting into it. And I've gotten in through X-ray machines, MRI machines before. You're able to cause a lot of damage with an unsecure medical device. So hospitals don't want to introduce that level of risk themselves. They have to remain HIPAA compliant, and they have to go through their pen testing. And if they get results back, this device is inherently insecure, they aren't left with a lot of options. So they want to try to cover that bridge before the problem comes up.
Yeah, I think we're running up on time here. So I just have a couple more questions for you, Etienne. I know you guys call everyone in your company gurus. Is that right?
We have a subset of people who work at our company called medical device gurus. Not everyone wears that name, but what we do is we hire people from the field who we have project managers, product development engineers, quality engineers, human factors engineers. We have a lot of different people who've worn different roles or worn different hats in the industry. And so now what they do is they help companies who are coming onboard the software and then understand the regulations behind the software and why things are the way they are to make sure that they can be successful. So yeah, it's a fun group. They're very passionate as well about what they do. They love the customers.
Okay. That'd be like our company calling everybody goats.
Some people probably wouldn't have a problem with it, but I don't know. Maybe someone might not like that. I don't know.
Right. And then where's the name Greenlight come from?
So Greenlight, we really just wanted to greenlight operations for people. We wanted people
like a stoplight, green, yellow, red.
Exactly.
Everyone can just keep going through all the lights.
We want you to be able to just keep going onto the market and then beyond. So we don't want you to have to hit the red lights of regulations.
I like that. Cool. Awesome. So where can people find you and find Greenlight?
Yeah, if anyone's out there who wants to learn more, we like I said, we put out content every day. www.greenlight.guru. I will say one other thing, if I may plug a survey that we're doing right now. we do a survey every year of the industry. So we call it the State of MedTech Industry Survey. So 2025 is coming up. Last year, we surveyed 613 MedTech professionals. So we're hoping to beat that this year. And so I don't know if we could put a link in the show notes or something, but I'd love it if people in your audience would be interested in fulfilling or filling out that survey.
Yeah, we can drop a link in the show notes for sure.
Really appreciate you guys having me on. This has been fun.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on another episode of our podcast here. Any final words of wisdom?
No, just stay cyber secure and make sure that your QMS is buttoned up. Love to, and maybe someday I'm gonna have to talk to Trevor more about TR51. Is it 51?
57.
57. TR57.
Pre-market. 97 for post-market.
Okay.
More acronyms.
Yeah.
More acronyms.
We'll talk about all the acronyms. No,
I have to do a separate episode just on the acronyms and unpacking those.
Unpacking MedTech's acronyms. I think it would be pretty successful. No, follow me on LinkedIn. I'm always trying to put out additional content there as well. And I'll hopefully I'll see you guys at an event coming up before too long.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining.